afternoon, everybody. Everyone. I should speak to the mic.
Thank you very much for coming here to Jewish Community Center and to be with us today. Today's Multicultural Migration Observatory. I will surely give him a today's seminar of Multicultural Migration Observatory is kindly hosted by Jewish Community Center. We are, as the name of the observatory says, we are about migration. So we migrated from the Krakow University of Economics a few streets away, and we are hosted here by Jewish Community Center. We thank you very much for hosting us today, this seminar here, for the book launch of the book Displaced, the Ukrainian Refugee Experience. Before I introduce the topic of today's seminar and our speaker, I would like to give first the mic to the director of the Jewish Community Center to welcome you here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Conrad. Welcome everybody here in person and those of you watching at home. It's really a great pleasure to be involved in this project. I got to know Tamar somewhat accidentally. She was interested in coming to Krakow and didn't know exactly what that would mean, but I straight away saw that this was a motivated, passionate, and incredibly intelligent person, and that I want to have those type of people around. And you always, when you're surrounded by people like that, you always figure out what to do comes later, but always comes. And Tamar came and became very quickly became part of our community here, our community of helpers, our community of people who were formed around the JCC to come together starting 7 months ago to help, or 8 months ago almost, to help Ukraine. And she began to talk to these people that we were helping, and that project grew and grew into this wonderful book that we're so happy to be involved in. And I think that the book is very much not about the JCC, which is, I think, important, and I think it tells the story, tells 45 stories of some of the thousands and tens of thousands of people that we've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to help so far. And Tamar, based on her history as a journalist, as a nonprofit executive, really, I think did an excellent job understanding how to speak to them, how to do it in a way without being condescending, and with showing them the respect and care that we also try to do as an institution. So I'm incredibly honored to be involved in this project, and I hope that everybody in the world reads it, because I think that there's a lot of information out there, a lot of statistics, and we talk about very often in these war situations, we talk about the number of refugees here, or how many this and how many that. But it's always important to remember that we're talking about individuals, and these are people who had lives and who have lives, and hopefully will continue to be their lives will hopefully get better, and hopefully get better back in Ukraine once Ukraine wins the war. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you. You've already disclosed some of the information about our today's speaker and the book. But thank you. This is great, because part of my responsibility is already taken. But anyway, I will first introduce the speaker and then the theme of our today's seminar. Tamar Jacoby is the president of Opportunity America, which is a US-based nonprofit working to promote economic mobility. She's a former journalist and author. She was a senior writer and justice editor at Newsweek, and before that, the deputy editor of the New York Times Open Ed page. She's the author of Someone Else's House, America's Unfinished Struggle for Integration, and editor of reinventing the melting pot, the new immigrants and what it means to be American, among other books. When Russia invaded Ukraine in early 2022, she traveled to Poland to help provide humanitarian assistance for Ukrainian refugees and report on the war. Her latest article appeared just last week in Wall Street Journal and covered the topic of access of migrants to education. Today, this seminar is above all devoted to the very freshly published book entitled Displaced, the Ukrainian Refugee Experience. And we will mainly talk about the stories in this book, but this will also be a starting point for a wider, broader sort of conversation. 3 weeks after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Tamar arrived intending to volunteer, unpack boxes. Instead, as Jonathan has just said, at the encouragement of the Jewish Community Center in Krakow, she began a series of interviews with Ukrainian refugees. Displaced, the book, captures their stories. Every story in the book is unique, one individual's painful journey, but together they add up to a collective portrait of Ukrainian refugee experience. The book launch, which we are holding now, will provide a space for discussion of Ukrainian refugees' diverse experience in Krakow, but then in Poland. The seminar will use personal stories from the book as a starting point for broader discussion, during which we'll tackle such issues as for example, what triggers some of people, but not others, including often their families, to leave Ukraine. How do refugees perceive the Polish reception and integration mechanisms created after February 2022? What worked and didn't work in the Polish approach to refugees, an approach that offered little cash assistance but encouraged civil society to come to the fore? What factors appear to be influencing the refugees' decision about the next steps, whether to stay in Poland, return to Ukraine, or, which happens also often, and there we have also people in this book, to move to the third country? What lessons, if any, do the last 7 months offer about how to help those who remain in Poland, people moving beyond resettlement to integration? These are only some of the questions we would like to tackle in discussion following the short sort of presentation of the book. Tamar, thank you very much for making the time and sharing the stories with us and the story about the book.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, looking around the corner. What a warm welcome, and it's so nice to be here at the JCC with so many of I won't say my friends from Ukraine. That would be presumptuous, but some of the people who I had the privilege to interview and listen to and gotten to know in these 6 months. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to our friends who are on our invisible family. Who are online. It has really been, this project really has been a privilege for me. One of the things that in my life that I really kind of appreciated to do the most. So thank you for coming to learn about it. Conrad has already told you about half my story. But let's go to the next slide. So I got here in March, in mid-March, just a couple of weeks after the invasion. There were already 2 million Ukrainians in Poland, and the JCC was already serving about 1,000 a day. And, you know, that was extraordinary. There was also an organization that, you know, just in January wasn't serving any refugees. And all of a sudden, already by mid-March, serving 1,000 a day. And it's just, you know, I kind of got here and I thought maybe I would end up unpacking boxes. And I had a conversation with some people here. I'm thinking you the refugees you're serving. And the JCC, we have quick interviews. We don't really have time to talk to them. And so I proposed a project where I would do in-depth interviews where we would ask them to tell me what they needed from us. But also to give them a chance to tell their stories. And at the beginning, I wasn't sure I was really helping anyone, right? Like I came here thinking I wanted to help people. And instead I was interviewing them. And I was sort of wondering, well, does this actually help? But as I kind of started to go through the interviews, I came to feel that not because I was doing anything, but just because the chance to tell their story seemed to be valuable to people. The chance to tell someone, the way I thought of it is when you're in an awful experience like this, you feel alone and you feel like no one is there to help you. And when you tell your story to someone else, you own it in a different way. And maybe it helps you kind of take charge of it. And so I don't think I did anything to help anyone, but I'm hoping that telling their story was for people some form of help. So the next slide, these are the people. 45 people interviewed in 35 centers. There were 6 men, which is kind of remarkable because there weren't that many men obviously in the migration. It also placed in 18. They spanned the gamut. They were Jews and non-Jews, right? And I don't know, I didn't actually count. But I think that certainly countries. They came from every walk of life in the UK. There were cleaners, HVAC guys, there were accountants, entrepreneurs, building managers, but also engineers, university professors, every kind of job. And they came from all over Ukraine. And you don't see the east part of the map here. But you don't see the west part of the map here, but you see the east, and they came from Lviv and Rivne and some of those cities, but also all these cities where the war really was raging. And they, the thing I remember most really about it was this was the very early days. They were processing a raw experience. Some of them had just come out a few days before. At the most, they had come out maybe a few weeks before. They were still trying to make sense of, something that almost no human being should ever have to make sense of. And that's kind of what's reflected, I think, in the conversation. Next question. So we asked them, next slide. Question slide, one of those things. We asked them, these are kind of the rough questions that we asked them. It was a little different every time, but the questions were really about their experience as refugees. What made you decide to leave Ukraine? How did you get to the border? What difficulties did you face at the border? Why Krakow of all places? You could have been anywhere. Who helped you in Krakow? And the hardest question, what lies ahead? Do you see your future in Poland, Ukraine, or somewhere else in Europe? And the next slide, quick just description of what the book is and isn't. It's not data. This isn't research. It's not a how-to for nonprofit. If you're wondering how to serve refugees, this is not the book for you. It doesn't give you any lesson. It's really just human stories designed to capture the experience. There are no heroes, there are no villains, there are no larger than life characters. They're just ordinary people, and it could be you or me. And to me, that's really what's most poignant about it. These are just, this could be you, this could be me, we could have had this experience. And as Conrad captured, every story is unique, but together they kind of add up to a collective picture. Next slide. So now we have our first portrait. And this person happens to be sitting in the room, so forgive me. I'm going to tell her story for her. I didn't expect you to be sitting in the room, but I'm thrilled that you're here. So this is Victoria, and she comes from Mykolaiv, which those of you who are following the war know was one of the places that where the fighting was the worst in the early days. There wasn't fighting in the city, but there was constant shelling from early days. And the story starts very humanly, right? Because Victoria's daughter called her, also sitting in the room, called her in the early days of the war and said, let's go. My bags are packed. Are you packed? Let's go. And Victoria said, oh, we don't think we're going to leave. And, why? I mean, it's shelling, we're in the middle of the war. Why are we not leaving? Well, we've lived in Israel and we've experienced shelling before. And maybe we don't think it's going to be that bad. And besides, I mean, I like the little glimmers of humor in all the stories, right? My husband has been nursing and his seedlings all winter, and he wants to plant them now. So he doesn't want to leave because he wants to plant the seedlings. But what a difference it makes. The daughter got out in the first week and the parents didn't get out until the 6th week. And, different human experience just based on a quick decision. You're not even sure what the decision you're making, but it can affect your life in such a dramatic way. So they spent 50 days in Mykolaiv under constant shelling. One of the stories that Victoria told me that struck me the most, I think all of us, when we watch the news, there came a moment when we realized, oh my God, Russia is shelling civilians, shelling people waiting in line at the ATM, shelling people waiting in line at the grocery store, shelling, destroying residential buildings. And the difference for me was to realize that, it's one thing for me sitting in the comfort of my home, looking at my computer to realize that. It's another thing when you're in the line. And Victoria was there in the line, and her shock at realizing this really struck me. She told me something very powerful, an image that lasted for me. She got that her ears were so sensitive, she thought they were vibrating when a plane was approaching. They live in this constant fear, and that's the kind of thing that happened. And then, the story that's almost too hard to tell, and forgive me, was when she got safely to Krakow. Her daughter was already here. The JCC welcomed her, sort of royal welcome. But then she saw a video of her neighborhood, and a place where she used to walk all the time. And what she could see in the video was a pile of bodies covered by a tarpaulin. And I mean, again, it's just, I can't even imagine that experience and how you would deal with that. So that's, and I guess the bottom line about Victoria is she's such a strong woman, such a strong, resilient woman, and people in the audience who know her are nodding. But even someone who's so strong, it's an incredibly difficult experience. And everyone handled it their own way, but Victoria, came through with her strength and resilience. So let's go to another story. I'm going to tell 3 stories. So this is Laddie. The laddie was an HVAC technician in Busha. And his wife is severely handicapped. Had surgery, and the result of the surgery was she was epileptic and paralyzed. And he knew the first day we're in Busha, the Russians are coming, I have to get my wife out of here. And what happened is his first decision was to drive to his village house, which, I mean, how did he know, was closer to the Russians than Busha. Let's keep the microphone. So he drove in exactly the wrong direction to a place where the shelling and was even worse, and where there were already occupying troops. And he spent several days at the village house under shelling, having to hide under the table. Finally, he got in his car, he and some other people, and they drove. And they drove kind of madly. They didn't know where they were going. They drove where the road took them. While they were driving, they were calling people saying, where should we go? When they would get to places, they would call people and say, can we stay with you? And the people would say, maybe, maybe not. It just sounds like the most chaotic experience. But then he got to the border, and volunteers noticed that he was a man with a woman in a wheelchair. And volunteers came to them immediately on the border and helped them and got them to a shelter in Krakow. And then the JCC found them in the shelter and again immediately said, well, look at this man with a handicapped wife, let's help them. And he's a story about the difference that help can make. If he had been here with no help with his handicapped wife, I mean, I don't know, what would have happened to him. He was like, he so needed the help. And he's a lovely, lovely man. He's an HVAC technician, right? So an HVAC technician, you think could be able to work even in Poland, right? You don't really need that much Polish, but someone had to stay home and take care of the wife. And so he never was able to work because he had to stay home and take care of the wife. And that's a little bit of a lesson for the nonprofits, right? Like people's needs are really complicated, and the needs are not necessarily the obvious needs. And the thing that could make the biggest difference for him would be a caretaker. But the other thing that was really memorable about him was kind of the way he put his uncertainty. It turns out in the last few weeks, he's gone back to, I guess, to Busha, because we can't reach him anymore here in Krakow. But at the time, he just had no idea. And I said, what are you going to do? What's the future? And he said, I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. I don't know what today is going to bring. I don't even know what this evening is going to bring. I just have to keep going. And, again, to me, that's such a powerful story of kind of resilience and also of the sacrifice that he was willing to make for his wife. I mean, it was an incredible story. He was willing to take care of her, whatever the circumstances. And he was willing to make any sacrifices that needed to be made, whatever the circumstances. So my third portrait, next slide, is Oksana. And Oksana is literally a rocket scientist. Like, for those of you who aren't native English speakers, like, it's a slang, like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. That means it doesn't take the smartest person on the planet. She is a rocket scientist was in a state laboratory in Pavlograd, which is a city pretty far east. And she was comfortable professional, she got a big job and she had a lot of, standing in her community, and she was really hesitant to leave. And at first she said, why should I leave? Why should I give up my comfortable life? Why should I get on a train? But finally she took the risk and she got on the train. And then she had a travel nightmare. She was one of those people that, the travel stories, you hear the same kind of iconic stories again and again of people who, had to take 3 trains, and at every train station, there are thousands of people and you can't get on the train because it's so crowded. And then you're on the train and there's nowhere to sit. And so her awful story was, her particular version of that was, she got to the train station, it was really crowded. She has 2 children. One of the children got on the train, and the crowd kind of pushed the child into the train. And the other child got stranded on the platform, and the crowd kind of pulled the child away from the train. So she's got one child going one way and one child going the other way. And she has to make a decision, like, what does she do? So finally she managed, she got on the train. But then she also had the other sort of remarkable thing about her story, well, 2 more things. She had a kind of breakdown eventually. On the 3rd train, she, by her own kind of description, she kind of, couldn't deal with it anymore. And again, a very strong person, right? But on the train, she just said, I mean, she didn't use the words, I lost it, but sort of what you would say in English is she lost it. She said, I used to be a rocket scientist. I used to have a comfortable life. I used to be a professional with a lot of standing in my community. And now I'm nothing. I'm on this train. I have nothing. I'm going someplace where I know no one. I have no idea what the future is going to bring. And I mean, again, it's like, I can hardly even imagine how devastating that would be. But, she described it to us. And then she got where she was going in Poland, which wasn't exactly Krakow. She was going to a town nearby, where she got a job stocking the shelves in the grocery store. Right. So like, she'd been a rocket scientist, and now she was working in a grocery store, putting the packages on the shelf and taking the packages off the shelf. And then she thought, well, maybe I'll go to Ireland. I don't know why she figured out Ireland, but she went to Ireland because she thought the jobs would be better. And in Ireland also, she's stocking shelves in the supermarket. And on the other days when she's not working in the supermarket, she's a cleaner in a doctor's office. And what's amazing about it is she doesn't say, oh, poor me. She doesn't say, oh, look, I was once a rocket scientist. Now I'm cleaning in the doctor's office. She says, I had to do whatever I had to do for my kids. And I've done it. And this is what I'm doing now. And this is my life. And this is what I had to do. And, we'll see what comes next. And again, just to me, it's stories of incredible resilience and incredible, human. I mean, most of the people I know back at home in America, they would not come through these things, these ordeals this well. These are really incredible courage, incredible strength, incredible resilience. So now I'm going to just move quickly away from stories and raise some of these questions that the bigger questions. So let's go to the next slide. So this is, this famous question about what are people going to do in the future? So I interviewed 45 people, but we could only track 23 of them. We only had email addresses and phone numbers for 23 of them. So these are the numbers of where they are as of August. And it's actually changed since because Valeria's gone back. But so the actual accurate numbers are 12 still in Krakow, 9 have returned to Ukraine, and 3 have gone on to a third country. And those are really interesting numbers, right? Those are really, really interesting numbers to me, that 40% have gone back already. And they haven't all gone back to Lviv. Like some of the people who've gone back Busha is one place, and there's another bunch of families that went all the way back practically to Donetsk. I mean, people have gone back to tough places, but and we don't know what the future will bring, but it's a really interesting number as a sort of a mid, a glimpse of something 6 months in. So now I'm just going to run quickly through the questions that I think these stories raise. So, the first kind of point that everyone talked about was their decision to leave. And as you saw kind of in Victoria's story, that sometimes that decision was just a kind of whimsical decision almost, or sort of contingent decision. It was just what it's like, what am I going to have for breakfast? Like, am I going to leave today or am I not going to leave today? And sometimes it had to do with the threat in their city, but not always. A lot of people left from Lviv where there wasn't much threat, and I'm not saying it wasn't scary, don't get me wrong, but I mean, some people left from Nikolaev, and some people left from Rivne, and it was a big difference. I think personal risk tolerance had a lot to do with it. Did you have little kids? Are you the kind of person that's scared anyway? How do you make the decisions in your life? To some degree, I think it had to do with resources and social capital. I think people who could leave often did, even if they weren't in such dire circumstances, and people who couldn't because they didn't have the resources, they didn't know anyone in the West, maybe didn't. I think there was a decision between deciding to leave and sort of drifting. Some people got in their cars and drove a little way, and then they thought they would stay there, and then actually they decided they would drive a little further and like that. But some people decided right that day, I'm going to Poland. So there was sort of a difference in how people made decisions. And the other thing that came up again in story after story was people making decisions without information. So the man from Busha went to his village house closer to the Russians. Somebody else came here, they're 2 engineers who've also gone back now. They came to Poland, but their best friend went to Borodyanka, which was, again, one of the places that suffered the worst in the fighting. She had a village house in Borodyanka. She went there and had a horrible experience. So people had to make decisions with no information in a way that I think is really, hard to understand and really challenging. So, I think we want to talk more when we get to the discussion about making this decision, but it's interesting to try to analyze it. Next slide, the reception in Krakow. And, what struck me here, one of the most interesting things in the interviews was many people started crying when they talked about how grateful they were. Like they would tell their story with complete composure and bravery and stoicism and resilience. And then when they started talking about how grateful they were to the Poles or the JCC or someone else, then the tears would come. And that was very striking to me. I didn't really know how to understand it, but it seemed very remarkable. Some of the people I interviewed had a lot of help from the JCC. JCC did everything for them: lodging, food, came frequently to the store, took classes. Some of the people didn't want any help. And again, what made some people want help, and some people, it wasn't necessarily need. It was just personal decisions. I didn't hear any complaints about not enough. And this is kind of interesting to me because when you go to meetings with researchers and when you go to meetings with people who are, I'm not pointing to Conrad particularly, but research, when you go to meetings with with people who run some of the nonprofits, they say, you know, Poland didn't give enough cash money and Poland didn't do enough of this and the schools aren't doing enough of that. And I understand those concerns, but I didn't hear a single complaint from a person. Like it was all, you know, we're grateful. And again, it tells you something. Sponsors made a big difference, what I'm calling sponsors, people who met someone here who took them under their wing and, you know, helped them find a place and then helped them make a doctor's appointment and then helped them, you know, get their kids to school. And sometimes that was someone at the JCC or some other NGO, but often it was just a friend, someone they met or a relative. Svetlana, who's here, had a friend who really took her under her wing and helped her. And those sponsors made a big, big difference. And I think when we think about policy, it's really interesting to think about those sponsors. But then the next thing I'll just say about Krakow, and we'll talk more about this in the discussion, you know, as hard as the past 6 months have been, the next months might get even harder, because teaching people job skills and helping people learn a language and some of the things that have to happen going forward in some ways are much harder than providing the first housing. Permanent housing is harder to provide than temporary housing. Job skills are harder to provide than some food. So, you know, in a way, we got through, Poland got through, Krakow got through, I didn't do it, got through the first 6 months, you know, with flying colors, but there is a challenging time ahead, even if no more people come. We're coming to the end. I'm going to stop talking. So we asked again this last question, this hard question that we asked everyone. You know, what are you going to do? How are you going to make the decision about what you're going to do next? And you know, what was interesting was the range of people. Some people couldn't even think about it. You know, I said, "What are you going to do next?" They just said, "What are you talking about? Like, I'm going to survive until tonight. You know, what am I going to do next? Like, why would I even? You know, that's just beyond my scope of even. I can't even see it." Others already had their minds made up. Others had already decided, I'm definitely going back, or I'm definitely going somewhere else. Several had already decided, I'm going to England. You know, I'm like that they hadn't even been here a week and they knew they were going to England. So a lot of variation. You know, what were the factors? Well, a lot of it had to do with who was still at home, right? Like who, you know, if there was someone close at home, sometimes they didn't want to go any further than Krakow. Sometimes they did, but that was a big factor. What's left of their city, I think, is going to be a big factor going forward. Are they built? You know, if you come from Mariupol, there's, you know, until they start rebuilding, you're probably not going back. If you come from someplace where there is something to go back to, different set of decisions. Again, social capital and opportunities mean a lot. You know, if you're someone whose kids can get educated in the West and take advantage of it, it's going to make a big, you know, that the West has an appeal that it doesn't necessarily have if you don't have those opportunities. And, you know, people with children talked about the children, you know, where is it going to be best for my children? And that, you know, that's, I mean, I came away, I mean, it's sort of crazy to say, but the strength of the Ukrainian families were one of the most powerful takeaways from the whole experience. You know, people are going to sacrifice for their children. They're going to do what they need to do for their children. So last slide, I think. This is just questions for policymakers. And nobody in this room is a policymaker, but maybe there's some policymakers listening. Community sponsorship, you know, like having a sponsor in the community who's an individual, who's not just an NGO, who's not just the government, but actually having a person who's your sponsor. That's an increasing trend. And that's what they're doing in England. That's what they're doing in America now. I think it's a really interesting idea. And like, how much more of that are we going to see? Is that going to catch on? How much cash assistance should the host country be giving? You know, if you give a lot of cash assistance, maybe that's helpful for the people, but there's also comes with some downsides. People get dependent on the cash assistance, and it also maybe creates a backlash in the community. So I think there's hard decisions to be made about how much cash assistance. I think after the war, it's going to be a big question. Are men going to be allowed to leave? Because I think some of the people I interviewed, they want their husbands to join them here or in England. And so are the husbands going to be able to leave? That's going to be a big question. What's Ukraine going to do to help people come back by rebuilding? That's going to be a big question, right? You know, is your city in ruins, or is there some place to go back to? And then for the people here, I think the big question is, you know, they're refugees now, but eventually they're going to be labor migrants. They're going to be people who are here because they want jobs. And they need a different kind of policy than than refugees needed. And will Poland and other receiving countries make that transition and do what they need to do for people? And will they make it right? And will they help people? And will people actually become labor migrants? So I don't know. I think I had the feeling I'm talking to a lot of different audiences. I'm talking to the people in the room who are interested in some more parts of the conversation than others. I'm not exactly sure who's online. I hope you were interested in some part of this. I think now let's open it up to conversation and questions.
Thank you very much, Tamar, for this fascinating story of how you got to write this book and what is in this book, and for this very important broader questions that you raised. I think one of the major sort of values of your work is that that you are bringing this human stories, bringing sort of the humans from behind the data in a way. And one of my major reasons to do this they are full of models, concepts, theories, but in a way, human beings are not easily visible, I would say, behind this theories, stories, models, and our findings. So, and statistics above all. So I think it is great that that your book comes out and depicts this very diverse stories of people from all walks of life who were pushed out from Ukraine and arrived to Poland, arrived to Krakow, arrived to Jewish Community Center and elsewhere, to other support organizations. But then at certain moment decided to either go back or to go further somewhere. So I think it is great that that your stories of all these people are hiding elements of everything. So I would like to start off the discussion around the book and the topics that you very important topics that you raise in this book by asking a few questions at the beginning, and then also encouraging others here and online to pose their own questions. So first about some facts that you presented in the book. Like, it's super interesting that you managed to interview so many men, because we when we were doing a big survey in May and June, and which covered over 500 refugees, and one of the major places where we were collecting data was the PESEL registration point, but also support centers on Daszyńskiego, among others, and many other places. We were able to track very few men. This is still our findings are in line what we know about the number of men that registered for PESEL. It's a very small number, especially we were sort of targeting obviously men above 18 years old. And these men are obviously they are covered by the mobilization, and they are not allowed to leave from 18 to 65. But obviously there are cases, exceptions, and I guess some of the men that you were interviewing were these exceptions. And while what I'm asking about them is as I was wondering whether you have in your interviews any information about how do they see themselves as Ukrainian male refugees, because this is a very special category of people that is not widely visible because of such a sort of hegemonic predominance of women with children. Males are not very much sort of there, not thoroughly investigated, and especially the perception of how do they feel as Ukrainian sort of male refugees. This is one of the. Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't say my sample scientifically representative in any way. You know, I spoke to people that I could find through the JCC. And there were, before I get to the men, on some other dimensions, they were all walks of life. You know, there were some cleaners and some working class people, all the way to university professor. But I would say as a whole, compared to like the population in the city shelters where I visited recently, a city shelter, very different kind of people.
Mhm.
The people here were generally better healed.
Mhm.
And not everyone was, you know, kind of drove here in their car with their nail polish, but there were plenty of people who drove here in their car with their nail polish. And so I wouldn't claim that my 45 were a representative sample.
Sure.
They were just the people I met. The men had gotten out, mostly they were caretakers. And again, this is kind of part of the theme that struck me, was people who had sacrificed anything for the person they were taking care of. So the HVAC technician, his wife was a paraplegic, so he got out because he could take care of her. There was some other people who had 5 children, and so if you have, I believe, more than 3, the men were allowed out. There was somebody who was this single father. And so he came with his daughter. So most of the men who I interviewed came because they were taking care of someone.
Mhm.
And I mean, so I've spent some time here, and I also have spent some time inside Ukraine since the war. I find that everyone in Ukraine is a complicated thinking about their role. What are they doing in the war? And I think there are people inside Ukraine who are fighting and feel guilty that they're not doing war.
Mhm.
And there are people in Ukraine who are not fighting, you know, or doing something else because they want to do their part.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's anything, I think it would be easy to say, well, men who got out, you know, they were not doing their duty or something.
Mhm.
I don't think that's so. Most of these people were, I didn't meet anyone who was ashamed that he was out. He felt that these people that I met felt that they were serving the people they loved in the best way they could, and serving their country in the best way they could. So I think, you know, I think it's tempting to have sort of moral judgment about who's doing what, but I think it's really misplaced.
Mhm. I'm asking because one of we're saying, like, why are all the Syrian men coming here? They should go back and fight. Huh? It's completely different. Refugee crisis, completely different situation. But I get the perception is that that men are out there fighting, and they are here. Then I was wondering whether they encountered any kind of questions like, "What are you doing here?"
No one talked about
Mhm,
that. I mean,
mhm.
I feel like everyone in Ukraine has their own inherent dialogue. That's the most valuable thing. Same way I had a dialogue about what am I doing by doing the most valuable thing. You don't have to be a man. You know, you come to a crisis and you say, am I doing the most helpful thing? Get up and say, I would say to myself every morning, you know, I'm just doing the victory. So easy. I'm not helping anyone.
Mhm.
And I think everybody in a crisis like this, everyone asks them to do the most valuable thing. And I think people were asking it of themselves, but I don't think people didn't complain, oh, the Poles have been mean to me because, or look down on me or anything like that because yeah. And again, most of them that were here because they were taking care of someone.
Mhm.
It was moving, again, it was moving sacrifice.
As you pointed out, obviously, that your views were not representative in any way. At the same time, we did quantitative research, and I guess some of the findings that presenting in your book match sort of a larger quantity story. What I mean here is above all the questions about the migration flow. So, for example, constantly, I just came from a conference in the morning, which was held by the Statistics Poland, and they were about also mentioning the issue of the border statistics to say how large is the sort of the migration population in Poland, and obviously this is not saying much, but your in a way your simple tracking of this you had very nicely, I think, shows that majority of people who came to Poland probably, as we know, we lack very detailed information, probably stayed. A significant number of them gone back, and some went to other countries. And then my question is, you mentioned this person that where you have 9 persons that you were able to trace that went back. And first, my question would be whether you are able to contact them back and to find out what were the motivations. And I guess, and here especially one of the important motivation, which is not strongly covered yet, is the in a way the aspect of the separation of family. To what extent this plays a role in the decisions to go back, I wonder. Did I understand well that this person went to the Russian controlled areas? Like, do you have any people who did that?
No.
And no, okay.
So question why people have gone back. I've only contacted them to find out where they are. I didn't actually follow up with any questions. But I'm thinking about the interviews I did. You know, there were 4 women who were all related to each other, like 2 kind of older women and 2 childbearing age women, and I think like 14 children. And they were from, you know, practically where the fighting is now. Like, I would be surprised if there wasn't a tank in their town. And they got out very late. And in late April, they were saying, we're going back, we're going back, we're going back. We call our husbands every day and we say, can we come back yet? And the husbands say, not today, not yet. And they have gone back. And I mean, they've gone back into practically the shelling. And they wanted to be with their husbands, and they wanted to be in their country, and they wanted to be all those things. And so I think some people went back to, as you say, join partners. I think some people went back because it's hard to live outside of your country, right? I mean, Valeri, you know, it's okay in Busha now. I mean, it's, you know, there's still things are destroyed, but Busha, most of the houses are still intact, and he can probably work. Someone will probably take care of his wife for him in Busha, and he can go back to work. You know, here he was idle and just taking care. He wasn't idle. He was taking care of his wife. He wasn't making a living, and he was dependent on other people. So I think there are lots of reasons. But then there are other people who were just very clear they're not going back. You know, and often it had to do with children. Often it was, my children, we're going to have more opportunity in the West. I'm going to stay in the West. They'll get educated. Opportunity.
Which is about security, because obviously you're right that a lot of parts of Ukraine are now fairly secure, but still nobody knows an hour and minute when a bomb comes. So obviously security above all is the most important thing. But you pointed out, yeah.
Like there was a couple of engineers who had a lot of JCC help. I'm sure a lot of people in the room know them. Married couple, older couple engineers. And I thought they were the most like nervous people on the planet. Like, I thought they were afraid to like cross the street. They were just very careful, very organized, you know, they were engineers. They were very careful. They planned their lives. Well, they've gone back to Kyiv. I never would have guessed they would have gone back. I thought they would be here till the war was over. So you just don't know.
But on the other hand, I think it is very important it is difficult, but very important that people go back. Like we were just, as I said, at the statistics conference when they were even, making models and hoping that a significant number of migrants will stay in Poland. But obviously, for the sake of Ukraine, of independent, sovereign Ukraine, this brain drain is terrible, and obviously it is super important that people are conditions for people to go back. So in a way, we should be happy that the return migration is taking place, and that the conditions are. We have to make sure that the conditions are sort of made so that return migration takes place. Yeah.
I mean, again, a city like Busha, where not that much got destroyed, easy to go back to. City of Irpin, just a few kilometers away, the buildings are destroyed. Much harder to go back. People are sleeping in railroad cars. So yes, I mean, big responsibility on Ukraine and on the West to help fund rebuilding so that there are conditions for people to go back. Very important. And I mean, again, social class is going to cut sort of interestingly across who goes back, because I think there's some people who have no resources for whom and whose life was so difficult in Ukraine that living here with support is actually easier. So there are going to be some kind of at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale who don't want to go back. And then there are going to be people at the top of the socioeconomic scale that are not going to want to go back because they can get a job in England. So it's going to be complicated how class is going to cross-cut with people's decisions to go back, and complicated for the West and complicated for Ukraine.
So as you pointed out in your book as well, in your presentation, the elements, the occupation sort of element. This is not uncommon that migration experience is linked with healing, with the you are. Wherever you go abroad, which is much less sort of important, less sort of prestigious than what you were doing back home. But then obviously there's the question also of economic labor migrant integration. It's still better that these people have jobs often than that they are jobless. Yeah.
Should we get some questions in the room?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm always kind of open. I'm encouraging people in the room and also online to pose questions.
Join the conversation with
join the conversation.
Any of these people know more about this topic than I do.
Dobrusha, would you like to ask some question?
I may ask one question.
Is this from you or from?
No, from me. Will speak.
Yeah.
Okay, the question of language. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I really like this in the story that you presented. What I like really a lot was the kind of a presentation how the decision making is not a rational decision making. How complex is it to make decision in such rapid changes when everything changes day by day, and you are not sure about anything about what would happen the next few days or even hours, and that making decision in such a situation is really influenced by so many factors. It's not a rational decision making like in normal migration. But I wanted to go to the question of adaptation that you mentioned, that this is kind of a key issue in also in deciding probably where to stay and whether to stay, for example, in Krakow. And there is a question of language, which is always the one of the even prerequisite of having a job in most countries abroad. So I was just wondering whether in your narratives people were telling about the capabilities or intentions or preferences or any plans of learning the language, and how it is from the other side, from the side of Polish society, of those people who support also the refugees. Do you think it's there is a big gap between the needs and what is being offered? And what, in your opinion, could be done in this field? Of course, Ukrainian and Polish, they share similarities. Yeah, it's the same family of languages, but still, what we know from many other researches that we've conducted before the war, even there is for Ukrainian people, learning the language, Polish language, is a challenge. It's not day by day that you can learn. You still need some kind of support or some time for that. So my question is about your experience now with the topic of language.
You know, great question. I'll answer with a few things. The first thing is I should have already talked about my interpreter, because I don't speak any of these languages. And I had a wonderful interpreter who I should have thanked early in this conversation. Her name was Margarita Klagina, and she is actually a Russian speaker, but she was wonderful. And the book would not be anything like what it is without her. But we did ask, again, remember that the people that we were talking to they were like a few days or a few weeks out of Ukraine. And so, you know, we would say, what do you want to do? What's the future? Are you going to learn the language? Would you be willing to do job training? And they would sort of say, yes, yes, yes. But it was sort of like saying, someday I'll fly to the moon, right? It wasn't like yet usually a plan of I'm going to the class at the corner on Tuesday. It was more someday, yes, of course. Some people, that's not everyone, some people were looking for classes already and having trouble finding classes, saying that classes were oversubscribed or they couldn't get into a class. I don't speak either language, but I do have a sense that they are similar, but also, as you say, that I mean, for one thing, the alphabet, there are a lot of challenges. But I interviewed some people recently, a sponsor and her Ukrainian friend, and we were sitting having coffee, the three of us. And at one point in the conversation, I said, what language are you speaking to each other? Because one of them was Polish and one of them was Ukrainian. And they said, well, she speaks Polish and I speak Ukrainian and we understand each other. And it was very sweet. And that's what you see in schools also. The teacher speaks in Polish and the kids kind of, you know, would you like a ruler? And the kids understand, well, that must be a ruler. That's not enough in a job. So I think the languages are similar enough that people might make friends and kids in school might be able to learn, and kids might get to the point where they can kind of live here. But to have a job, for most jobs, you probably need more. And I think, you know, it's always true of adults when they're trying. I've studied Hispanic immigrants in America. Adults learn enough, just as much as they need and no more. And so there are two challenges. One is providing enough language classes, but the other is, will people attend language classes? And will they take advantage of it? And will they realize that their opportunities will be much better if they take the language classes? And will they realize, you know, there's always the factor of, well, I'm going home tomorrow, so maybe I don't need to learn. You know, there are a lot of things that stand in the way of a smooth language transition that isn't just whether the classes are available. Whether the classes are available matters, but it's probably not the only thing that, and we need more, but it's probably not the only thing that matters. Let's see if there's anyone in the room. Olga, were you going to ask a question? Am I going to put you on the spot? Were you going to ask a question?
Can I read the question? Yeah, the comment. Yeah. Okay. So there is a comment from.
Good.
Okay.
Victoria, speak to us.
In my city every day.
Can we give her
I
a
speak
microphone?
Krakow.
Yeah. We're glad you're here. The JCC is glad you're here. Bye. Bye.
Okay, there is a question on the chat, so I can read it. It's from Patrycja Czeszczyńska. She's our friend and collaborator in our researches. She says, "Many thanks for your fascinating story and for capturing real life's lived experiences and the voices. This is very close to my own approach as an anthropologist. My question is if you could tell us about how they reacted to you as a person involved in JCC, and at the same time, a journalist from the US ready to work with them and listen to the stories. Was it easy to build a rapport? Was it easy to gain the trust? That's the first question. The second is about the future. What reactions to your book do you expect in the States? What kind of audience do you wish it will reach? So there's a question from our anthropologist.
Okay, so thank you, Patricia. I'm so glad you're here. I'm sorry I can't see you and answer you in person and see your smiling face. But thank you for joining us. It's a really good question about trust. I mean, I don't think I come across as particularly trustworthy. I don't speak the language. Like, why would anyone trust me? It's hard to know. I didn't experience a challenge of people seeming not to trust me. And I'm not sure whether that's just kind of the way I present myself in a conversation, or my interpreter, I think, was very helpful. And again, it's kind of striking because she spoke Russian. And we were worried at the beginning that the Russian would be off-putting to people. Many Ukrainians have decided they're not speaking Russian anymore. And she's clearly Russian. She's not a Ukrainian who speaks Russian, she's Russian. And we were very concerned that this would be off-putting, but it didn't seem to be. I think it has something to do with, again, a sort of a need when people first got out to tell their stories. I mean, I think there is something I think research has shown that people, when they tell their stories, and even if they just put it in a chronological order for themselves, it can be reassuring, because you have sort of a bunch of chaotic impressions. If you can just sort of tell it, it sort of helps. And I think people felt the opportunity to talk was something, and in a way we were like blank screens. It wasn't about like they liked me. It was about that they wanted to tell their stories. I'd be interested to hear if Patricia's experience is the same. In the US, I hope this will, there's a lot of fatigue in the US. In the beginning, people were very concerned about the war, but less and less. And it's easy to forget what's happening, and it's kind of in the newspaper, but not everybody reads every day, and the refugees, people forget. And so I hope that this will remind Americans that something is happening here, and they will step up, continue to provide the aid, and continue to help, because it's going to take American help both to win the war and to rebuild the country. Are you going to ask a question?
To jest bardzo trudne pytania były i bardzo często te pytania padają do mnie też od tych ludzi. I sytuacja w Ukrainie, kiedy my odkryliśmy, na ile jest zwyrodniały ten reżim Putina. Praktycznie to jest nowitny genocyd przeciwko Ukraińcom. Ale jednak, jak pani zaznaczyła, że osoby, których pani rozmawiała, wrócili do Ukrainy. Nie patrząc na te trudna sytuacja tych osób jest, bo to są osoby potrzebujące, bardzo potrzebujące. Ten Waleria Chowenko z żoną, która miała epilepsję, ona już była w bardzo ciężkim stanie i on się odważył wjechać z nią, wrócić, żeby ona chociaż w domu już miała te ostatnie chwile. Bardzo ciężkie te wyzwania są, bo osoby, które byli onkologiczne, które u nas zostały teraz potrzebujące osoby. Niektórych po tygodniu, jak wrócili do domu, to zmarła taka Krystyna, u nas była w Paszkówce. Ona wróciła do domu i po tygodniu zmarła. I córka została 15 lat. Czyli to były bardzo trudne momenty. Tak.
Okay, So
I just want to say, also someone who I really am so glad that you're here and to have a chance to have a conversation because you really know this story, you've lived this story from all sides, and I really appreciate you being here and having a chance to come talk to you. The person in the room I most wanted to ask a question.
I teraz powstaje pytanie o
Okay, the very key issue about people who had already who are in worse situation, who are ill, who are handicapped, who are suffering oncological problems. Some of them they Ukraine. Some of them returned just to the last days of their lives among the relatives. That was a very hard decision. But so many of those people stay in Krakow, and there is now a thinking of what to do, how to help those people who especially need help and especially dependent on other people. What kind of help can be given, especially that the institutions that already assist such people in Poland, they are often full. They don't have capabilities enough to help even the Polish people. So now the new people who come from places, they cannot go back. Some people are from Mariupol, from other places that are totally destroyed. They have no opportunity to go back. So the question is, I'm not sure, but if there are any problems to the of who need this help
You know, I mean, Owen's likely to know the programs more than I do. But I mean, if you know, there's two things. So, you know, the JCC, for example, and again, you know better than I, and now they're not housing anyone. They're focusing their housing on people with special needs. And that makes a lot of sense to me. You know, after 6 months, the healthy people, you know, we want them to find jobs and do what they can to become independent. That's better for them. They'll be happier and more fulfilled. And then the nonprofits can focus, and the NGOs maybe can focus on the people who need the most help. I don't know to what degree other nonprofits are making that decision. And I don't know, there are people who say that there might be a second wave now. And if there's a second wave, the nonprofits will go back to having to help everyone. So you know, let's hope there's not a second wave, and let's hope that many more of these NGOs start to think about giving the resources they have to the people who need it most. Because you're right, they're the most helpless and the most in need, clearly. Online?
Keep yours for yourself. Thank you. I'm checking if there are any more questions online. There are so many important topics, and this conversation could go on for hours, I guess, with all the data that you collected. But just last thing, like I'm have many things noted down, but one of the things there may be linked to some extent. One very important issue that you raised was the issue of the reception and how warmly people were like welcomed. And I can tell you, we in our quantitative research, when we look comparatively between Krakow and Vienna, we can clearly see that Ukrainian refugees say that they were welcomed much more warmly in Krakow than in Vienna. So this is clearly visible in the. These are like probably my last questions. I have many, but I don't want to monopolize this discussion. Is the questions of sponsors and the issue of further migration. You have tracked some of these people who have gone further. To what extent in their future migration, some contacts and sponsors played a role, and what are their experiences? Because the vast majority of the narratives I hear on sponsorship, they are showing the sort of mutual beneficial side of it. So in a way, showing that this is not so much often to the help of refugees, but to the communities that welcome them, invite them. They help them out to revive their life, their purpose. I know personal stories. One of the persons who was carrying out research with us, Olena, she profited from the sponsorship program. She's happy with her daughter now in US. But it seems it's not only for her own benefit, it's also for the benefit of the community that welcomed her. I was happy to meet these ladies who welcomed her, and it seems that this has done an amazing job for them as well. So I wonder your last sort of insights from your data and your sort of reflections on this.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful about the sponsor model. You know, in the past in America, you came and it was a nonprofit that basically welcomed you, and the nonprofit took care of you for a few weeks, and then it kicked you out the door and said bye. And you didn't really have anyone who you thought of as your kind of your mentor or your friend or your friend who helped you. And I've seen it here in Poland, and I've seen it, you know, people like you, Olha, who played that role at a nonprofit, but in a different way than nonprofits often play. And I've seen it in those same American women. It makes all the difference in the world for the refugees. You know, little things like, how do I top up my SIM card? There's someone who's your friend who's kind of helping you do it. You know, to bigger things like have the courage to try the language, or you know, you can drive the car, take my car, try my car, learn on my car. It's invaluable, I think, to the refugees. And I agree with you. It's very rejuvenating, reinvigorating for the sponsors. They suddenly have a purpose. They see something in life that's a little bigger than their ordinary lives, and they see that they can help someone. And I think that makes a big difference for a lot of people. I've talked to someone at the sponsor model experience in America where it didn't go so well. I don't think it always goes well. And I think for policymakers, we want to think about, you know, how to tweak it so that we get the best we can out of it for everyone. But I think it's got a lot of promise, and I'm very interested in seeing how it unfolds. Conrad, I want to thank you before we close. I want to thank you for the opportunity to do this. I want to thank the JCC. I want to thank everyone who was here, who participated in interviews. I really want to thank you for the opportunity to have the seminar. And the overlap of your data and my qualitative research is really super interesting, and I hope we can continue to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I want to.
Word from Olga. In fact, when you have here the logo of the Jewish Community Center, that we are building a Jewish future in Krakow, so Olga said it's very important to underline that it's not only building a Jewish future, but also Ukrainian and Polish, a common future in the city.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga, for this reflection, and thank you, Tamar, for sharing with us the stories behind the book and how the book came into existence, and for for giving us your time today to talk about the book. And again, big thanks for JCC to host the observatory seminar. And I hope it's not the last time we see each other, where we will continue to cooperate on migration projects in the future. So once again, many thanks to all that join us online and offline, and we will inform you about next seminar soon. Thank you.